tell the audience who you are and what you do.
Okay, my name is Sofie Skapski, and I'm a visual artist, and I work with oil and cold wax.
And you make very...
textured paintings.
Textured is the word I was looking for too, yeah.
Yeah.
And I noticed with your paintings, the texture is about all the same depth.
Well, it depends. It depends on the painting I'm doing
and
whether I'm using a palette knife or a brush, because I do some with brushes that are not quite as textured, but do have the brush marks and everything. Well, it's harder to see, like if you're looking at it online. Yeah, and then some are more built up in areas, and then I do the ones that are like mosaics. Well, I call them mosaics.
Yeah, and that's the ones, it kind of looks like a squished raindrop. Every brushstroke.
Yeah, that's a cute way of saying it.
How did you come to that method?
I'd always been interested in mosaics, and I had started painting, because before I started painting with the cold wax, I painted very thin, with oils, but very thin, and I started doing sort of mosaic style paintings, just doing dabs of color. And as I just developed it with the cold wax, and I was experimenting around, and I started making these dabs of color, and they turned from, drag bits and dabs into these actual little pieces that I sort of think of as tiles. Yeah, and I just overlap them. Some people think they're like fish scales or something because they're overlapped.
Yeah.
Yes.
How did the cold wax, and maybe when did that come into you?
Okay, that was about maybe the end of 2014, 2015. I was at Art Alchemy Studios, and some of the other artists were using cold wax, like Nicolette Balakowski and Helen Utzal and Marianne Anhorning. So Helen gave me a big scoop of it and said, try it out. And I did, and it was funny because before that, I liked having paintings where you could actually see the texture of the canvas. And then I just went, wow, and just kept going.
That's kind of amazing that you went from the texture, because the paint was so thin and transparent, to a texture now where you can't even see the canvas.
Yeah, well, it's been really, a growing experience. I think, artists have to sort of try new things and develop and not stagnate.
Do you think they have to, or do you think that's a choice?
If you want to keep inspired and enjoy what you're doing, well, personally for me, I have to, I think.
I think I have too.
Yeah.
When did that start happening for you?
Well, I don't know, maybe in the last 10 years. It all depends what you consider recognized and,
I'm wondering for your own self, did you have any moments of, or what were your earliest moments of like, hey, I got recognized for my skill, or I saw the piece, or feel like a real artist?
I mean, I felt like a real artist all my life. Because you don't really have to sell art to be an artist. You're an artist if you're making art.
Yeah.
And selling art is, another thing. It can be just a bonus, or it can be a business, depending on how you go about it.
So for you, as long as you were making?
Well, definitely. If you're making art, you're an artist.
I don't think anyone believes that. So.
Well, the success shouldn't be dependent on whether you're selling something.
I totally agree.
Yeah. It's dependent on, like, if it's rewarding to you, or you feel comfortable with how your work is developing.
What were you making in your early days? Do you remember, like, drawings in kindergarten, or?
Oh, yeah. With my sisters, we used to draw all the time when we were growing up, when we were kids. And in high school, we took art. And then I went straight from high school to Capilano College and studied art.
Did you have a focus at the college?
It was supposed to be a commercial art program that we were in. And it was a new program because it was the first year of Capilano College. It turned out that everybody there didn't really want to do commercial art. And we had this wonderful teacher, Stephen Lesgard, and we did do commercial art classes, which were really excellent, like, design and composition and things like that, which were very important. But we were able to just develop, creative projects and work on more fine art and not really focus on commercial art, which was really great, yeah.
And when you say projects, maybe like what kind of projects?
Well, actually, that's sort of part of where the mosaic started, because we had an independent art project, was one of the classes we had, and I just had to research and found out about mosaics and did all that on my own. You have to remember, this was like 1969, 1970, and there was a certain attitude towards teaching that was different from now, I think.
So,
Well, that was all, you know, in the hippies in the 60s, and it's all like more free thinking and it wasn't into the conceptual stuff that's really, you know, important in art schools now, I think. So we were able to like explore things a lot, but we did have a lot of discipline as well, like learning the composition and the drawing, which is like vital.
That's interesting. I'm reading a book written by Anne Innes-Stagg right now, who's a giraffe. Well, that she's primarily known for being a giraffe scientist, the giraffe scientist. And the part that I'm at in her book right now is about when she was going to college, teaching zoology and biology. And she was saying too that the teaching is different because then the teachers could really direct what the students wanted to learn. So it sounds like even in science, it was something like your art, that they would say, if you're interested in this, let's explore it. But did you ever go into a science aspect of maybe like the composition of the paints or the wax?
No, I didn't. I didn't do that.
One of your interests?
No.
But I do remember going to an art show of yours, the Open Studio, last summer. And it was fascinating to me that because your pieces were in the sun, the heat had released a bit of scent, and you said the pieces had become very glossy.
Yeah, and that's the thing with when you're painting with cold wax and oils, there's a certain time where it's soft and it's really workable, but at that time, if it's in the sun, it will get really soft and melt. Once it's cured, like after, you know, 3 or 6 months, if it sits in the same heat and hot sun, it doesn't get affected at all.
I had no idea.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
got to be science behind that.
Yeah, because like people are sort of concerned. They say it's wax.
Yeah.
And they're worried, oh, is it going to melt? What should I do? Where can I hang it? And I said, well, when it's cured, you can actually hang it anywhere. It'll be fine.
What do you do to cure a piece?
Well, it's just dries. Just drying. Just drying, yeah.
But a certain temperature.
No, it's just not put it in the full sun.
Okay.
You know, you can just have it hanging on the wall in the summer and it'll dry normally. But once it's dry, then it's cured, you know, like you can actually use cold wax to finish paintings instead of a varnish. You can rub it on a painting and use it as a finish.
What kind of waxes are they?
Well, the one I use is a Dorland's cold wax, and it has beeswax, and I'm not sure what other wax. It has another wax, and it has some kind of resin in it.
Do you want to go back a bit to, I'm curious to know a bit more about your interest in mosaics. Do you have an idea when that started?
I think when I was given this thing, you have to choose something for your project that you're going to be doing, and I just decided I really liked mosaics, so I decided to do it. And I guess I sort of have this thing where I like detail a lot, and so I liked making all those little shapes and putting them all together. And it was something we were working on in school is to get away from too much detail. But it was nice to have the detail, but in a larger design where there wasn't that much detail in the design, so the details in just getting the colors to bounce off each other. But also going to Europe and going to Venice, and the cathedral at the San Marco has got the most amazing mosaics, and I got a book from there, and it's really inspired me. And also Gaudi in Spain, he does all those mosaics with the pieces of pottery. Well, he does amazing architecture and all that. Yeah. So that was really inspiring for me too. And I was introduced to that like when I was in my early teens. So. And
Gaudi's work is so flowing, like he's doing these mosaics on a lot of curves.
It's really organic, yeah.
Was that the same for Venice? I mean, I know that.
No, the Venice, it's not. It's flat, but there's some curved arch, like ways, like domes, I guess. In the domes, how it's curved, it's all built in there. Yeah.
Did you ever experiment with painting on curved surfaces?
No. I don't think I'll do that.
Do you have anything that you're thinking about trying next?
No, I don't. I'm just going to keep going, but just seeing what other kinds of directions I can build. And I've been experimenting with using those powdered pigments and the Pearlax made by Jacquard. Yeah, and they, adding that in there, and you get this little pop of shine. And
I was going to ask you too, because you said if you feel like you're an artist, you're an artist. Do you know when you started feeling that?
No, I just have been doing it all my life. It was just something I always enjoyed doing and wanted to do. And then in high school, and they're saying, you have to pick a career, you have to pick something to do. And I'm going, what? Can't I pick art?
Did you think it was really an option, or were you worried that it wasn't an option?
Well, I mean, they would say, well, you have to pick a career. And so I went to the counselor, and then she was saying, well, yeah, I guess architecture is nice, but I'm terrible at math, so I can't do that. So she was saying, what about commercial art? And I'm going, yeah, well, I guess I'd be doing art. So that's why I went into the commercial art, which sort of like, within the first year it turned into something else. Turned into fine art.
Yeah. Did anything you learned there really stick with you?
Yeah, definitely.
Lots.
Like the color theory, the composition, and just knowing how important what drawing is to, developing your work.
And you usually draw your paintings to prepare them, don't you?
Well, I do draw the initial drawing on the panel, yeah. I do visualize a lot of things in my head and hold things in my head, like a lot of people do those little small thumbnails for their paintings, and I don't do that. I do use a photo as a reference, which I've taken, but I don't actually look at it very much while I'm painting. But it's mostly I have everything in my head, and I sort of visualize where everything's going to be. But I think that's because when I was in art school, we studied composition, so like we took it from like doing little circles to ovals. We took it like from very basic, and I think that gave me this sort of a composition skill that's just inside me that I don't really have to think of.
Well, I was going to compliment you on it stems from your drawing skill, but your paintings look intentional. For example, I have a print of yours in my house. It's a robin. I think it's sitting in cherry blossoms.
Mountain ash.
Mountain ash. Okay.
Red berries.
Red berries?
Yeah.
I love it. But one of the things I love about it is, like, the beak doesn't look too big, or the head doesn't look swollen, or like if I tried to draw, and a lot of artists, and I like their work if it's just kind of a hint of a bird, but I like in yours that the birds look like birds, the branches look like branches.
I guess for me that's important, and if I try to do those stylized things that don't really look like the birds, or people have fat arms or something, it just looks awful, looks terrible. So I'm more into keeping things in proportion, how they naturally are in nature. And I think that's part to do with drawing too. Like, because when you draw something and you look at something for that extended period, all that observing it and drawing it, you understand it more. So when you go to actually do the painting, you understand what you're working with, and so you can develop it more.
And is that how you're able to, because I've watched videos of you paint, I've watched you paint in person. It amazes me how, like, which color you're calling these tiles.
Yeah, which color all my little dabs of paint are.
Yeah, and how do you know that?
Sort of innate. I just go with it, and sometimes I'll go back and I'll go, oh yeah, I need one more here, or I need something here, I need a little highlight here. I sort of see this circular thing going in the painting. I guess I really like a sort of circular composition, so I'll see, well, I need it. If I have some pink here, and I'll put another one down there and another one up here, and have it balanced like that.
Is there any other little rules you have for yourself like that?
No, I don't like rules.
You don't like rules?
Yeah, that's because I'm a child from the 60s. We don't like rules.
I was going to ask you if you do figures.
Yes, I've done a big series of children. I had a show in Parksville at the Mac Center, and it was about childhood. I had about 50 paintings in the big gallery there, and I used my grandchildren as models. So I took lots and lots of photos of them, and I drove them crazy. Now they don't let me take pictures of them anymore. and I based it on them, but they're not portraits. So kids playing, just kids doing what kids do, just moments in childhood kind of thing. I've done a lot of figures. I did figure painting mostly like in the early 70s. That's what I mostly did. Because of all the life drawing, I had all those references, and I really enjoyed the life drawing.
And was it having grandkids that drew you to them as a subject matter?
Not really. When I had kids, I did the same thing. When my kids were young, I did a lot of drawings of them and some paintings as well. It's just sort of not necessarily the fact that they're my grandkids. It's just childhood is such an amazing part of life, and I just wanted to explore it and embrace, like celebrate it. That's the word I'm looking for.
And how was that work received?
I think people really enjoyed it. I didn't expect to sell a lot of paintings because I can understand people don't really want to buy paintings of other people's children, you know. Yeah.
What kind of work was it? Were they watercolors?
No, they were painted mostly in oils and in acrylics because I did paint in acrylics earlier. About, I think I changed over around 2010, 2011. But they were mostly the oils with the thin paint. And in the end of it, some of them were already the textured ones that I was doing. And some were sort of deconstructionist too. Yeah, and you know, larger pieces, not huge, you know, like maybe 30 by 40 would be the largest. And then, you know, down to like small, like 8 by 10s or something.
And how did you get that show?
Just applied for it. Yeah. Just do a proposal and send it.
Have you done any other solo shows?
Yeah, I've done other solo shows. Well, I've done solo shows at the Parallelis Gallery, but those are sort of vanity shows. You just apply for a space and you pay for the 2 weeks and you do the show. I've done 2 solo shows in Australia, because my son lives there, and I took all my work in my suitcase that sort of like nested inside each other. I have an upcoming solo show at the Old School House in Colicum, and that's coming up in January. It's on January the 27th. Well, it opens on the 29th, I think. Yeah, the opening. So that's what I'm sort of busily just finishing off the last paintings and getting everything done before the end of the year, because I'm going to Australia for 3 weeks, arriving home the day before I have to take the paintings to Tosh.
Feel prepared?
Yeah, I'm pretty prepared. I sort of found out that I have that personality where I like to be organized.
So is there a theme of that show?
Yeah, it's forest bathing. I do paint so many trees, so I sent in a proposal for forest bathing and just sort of all the wonderful things you get from walking in the forest and the aerosols and how uplifting it is. And it's also involves how trees communicate with each other as well. So lots of the names of the trees, the names of the paintings, sort of illustrate that, like, you know, the meeting of the minds or something like the one I have at the airport. So that's sort of like all the trees are getting together, and, you know, how trees nurture other trees, and they send out all these things in the root system with the fungus and everything, and support each other. And so that's what the show's sort of about, that and how we benefit from going in there. So I want it to be, it's in the smaller gallery they have, and I want it to be like you go in and you feel like you're actually going into the forest.
Because you were talking about how trees support each other, and that's one of the things I wanted to know too as I'm talking to artists. Involvement in art alchemy, you must have a support system there. And do you feel that in the wider community here? Yeah,
no, I'm not with Art Alchemy anymore, but I still am, you know, close to them and involved in there and everything. I think it's very important because as an artist, if you're alone in your studio all the time, you become very, very isolated, and you need that community. And painting in Art Alchemy, I was there for 5 years, and it was a wonderful experience because there were 8 artists, and you just inspire each other and you have ideas, you bounce off each other. It's very supportive, but as a whole, I think the artist community here in Courtenay and Comox Valley is really supportive. I used to belong to the Federation of Canadian Artists when we had a chapter here, and we did a lot of, you know, members shows and things like that, and meetings and some workshops and that, and that's all really important.
When was that?
I guess I joined in about 2006. We ended up, like the last year, it was like Brian Buckroll and Diane Knight and a few other artists. We were on the board, and I think Brian had done it for 3 years, and I'd been on the board for a few more years than that even, and couldn't get people to step up and take the positions, and we had to close the chapter. But there's all sorts of other outlets, like there's other painting groups, you know, like Brushworks, and I think there's one called the Monday Bunch or something. And I think it's really important for artists just join these groups. And that's what sort of brought, when I moved out here in 2004, I didn't know anybody. And when I joined the Federation of Canadian Artists, I entered a community that was really welcoming and, you know, supportive.
And you're part of the Comox Valley Arts. How did you get involved with that? Because
they have the studio tour and a number of other things, and just they used to have the Mirror Gallery before, where they would have shows and things. So it's just another community thing to get involved with and support the arts.
I was going to ask you, because you said you always felt like an artist. You were always creating with your sisters.
Mm-hmm.
They gone on to keep creating?
My one sister does art. My younger sister who lives in Merville here. She does art, some sort of more on and off. Like she did a lot of watercolors of Cumberland houses and that when she was in the 90s, I guess, when she was doing real estate and buying houses. And she was buying houses in Cumberland and, renovating them and selling them again. And she did a lot of beautiful watercolors of them. And she still does art, but she's a horticulturalist mainly.
And what about all the kids? Because you have grandkids.
Well, my grandkids, especially my granddaughters, are really love art. And when I go to Australia, I paint with my granddaughter all the time. So she does the oil and cold wax paintings with me now. So we paint together. And my grandkids in Calgary, I was just there and they drew dragons like crazy. We had this big dragon drawing session, but I always do art with them.
What ages are they?
Let's see, the one in Australia is 10. So the two girls in Calgary are 9 and 11, and the boy's 6. And we just all sit down and do art together.
It's too early to tell if they might be interested in false.
I'm not sure. I know my granddaughter in Australia really considers herself an artist, and I think she really wants to be an artist. She draws all the time. So I think that she wants to go with that. My son in Calgary, whose children are doing all the art, he is a teacher, but he got his degree in art. Like he went to UVic and studied visual arts.
Yeah, and I was wondering, I guess we can't quantify it, but you had to have been part of that. Like, you had to have been influenced by you.
Yeah, and I was also influenced by, my dad. He actually visited an art school in Mexico one time and brought back all the pictures. And I wanted to go there, but I had no idea where it was. And then when I got back from Malaysia, I took some art got some art into a gallery in Vancouver. And I told them, I'm going to go to Mexico to study art. And they go, oh, you're going to San Miguel de Allende? And I went, yeah, I guess. I'd never heard of it before. So that's where I went. But the interesting thing is I wanted to go to Mexico and have a Mexican influence and study in that way. And I found that at the Instituto de Bellas Artes in San Miguel de Allende, all the teachers were American.
Oh.
So it wasn't really the experience I had been expecting, anticipated. It was a wonderful experience, but not really what I'd had in mind. I thought I would get all this. And I actually found myself doing most of the things independently, and the instructors would just come around and not really say much at all.
I have the same question from Malaysia. Like, are any pieces that you created there still a part of your heart?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are they quite different?
Well, from what I'm doing now, totally different. I mean, that was in the early 70s and, a long time ago. You progress through a lot of things. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there was kind of a thread that you kind of had through your life, maybe what you were doing visually, did going to Malaysia like really put you off on a tangent?
I was just growing as an artist because I was very young then. So I was doing mostly figurative stuff and abstracts.
Part of what I wanted to ask you already answered, that you don't really have a idea for what you might want to explore next.
I think that's sort of organic too. That grows out of what you're doing. Yeah. And that's sort of serendipitous. So that is better than planning, I think.
Yeah. And I wanted to make sure I asked you too if there's anything that you want.
Okay, I think you were talking about challenges. And so I thought about that. What are the main challenges I've had to face? And I think there's 3, I think, really important challenges. And one, of course, is inspiration, like what happens when you get sort of like writer's block, like artist block. And then there's the one about isolation, which we sort of discussed about joining a group and being part of an art group, collective or something. And then the other one, of course, is the biggest one, is how to market your work. Yeah. That's the really hardest one. So with the inspiration, I think it's sort of like writing. It's the same thing when people are challenged in writing and they get a writer's block. They just start writing daily journals and they just write every day and they just sit down and write without any intent and just keep writing. And it doesn't have to mean anything. Yeah. And that just spurs everything. So sort of the same thing with art is daily painting. And I've done that before. So the daily painting is you have to go at it like you're painting. And it doesn't matter what the outcome of the painting is. You're not painting it because you want to have a saleable work. So you're just painting for the sake of painting. So you could set up a still life or anything and just paint. And the next day you could paint over the same painting. And the next day you could paint over the same painting again. But just the act of painting and doing it daily and just helps spur on. And then you start getting the ideas and you start flowing and you start thinking of a series you might want to work on and that. Because lots of times, like if you've been doing something and you've been working on a series and then you've done it and you finished it and it's like, what next? And you can sort of be stumped and you find that if you're doing the same thing, you find it stagnant and you don't feel happy with it. So that way, when you do the daily painting, you know you're not trying to make something saleable or a finished product. You're just doing it to do it for the process. And that gets you through it.
And then do you have more advice or perspective on isolation? Like you touched on that it's really important to have friends in the art community or acquaintances.
Yeah, or be in a studio with other artists. Yeah. When I was young, after I got back from Mexico and that, and got married and, you know, went to work and everything, it was hard to get myself back into art because I didn't have a studio and I was just trying to work at home and it was really hard to get things done. And I think that if I joined a group or been with other artists in a studio, I would have been doing a lot more than what I was doing while, you know, my family was growing in that.
So you said it was hard to get back into art. When did you get out of art?
Well, it's like you start working, you have to have a job, you have to make a living, and you don't have the time to devote to be doing it full time. Like when I was in Mexico and Malaysia, I was doing it full time because I wasn't doing anything else.
So it wasn't ever really that you stepped away from art?
No, it just got...
Had to take it back.
Yeah, exactly. It got into little compartments here and there and you fit it in when you can. But I think that if you're in a studio and with other artists, it just gives you that momentum and the impetus to do it. Whereas when you're at home and you're going, well, I could go into the kitchen and do this, or I could go into this room and start working on a painting, and then you get interruptions and it's really difficult.
So it sounds like, because we talked a bit about challenges for marketing, isolation, kind of writer's block or creative block, being stagnant. So it sounds like your answer to a lot of that is to be part of a community. Part of a community,
yeah, and just do it. And when you have a studio, have a designated space where you work, so you're not just working in your kitchen or in a corner somewhere. And you have your studio where you can go and just be there. And like right now, I'm back at home. I have a studio at home, so I'm not part of the collective anymore. So I decided to volunteer at the Comox Valley Art Gallery once a week. So I'm there with people talking about art, meeting people, and that just gives me that outlet.
And do you find you have an online community now too with our technology?
Yeah, there are online art groups you can join. I did belong to one at one time when I started painting with the water mixable oils, and I joined one for a while. The same with writing. Like I've been on online writing groups as well, and they're a really good way to go as well.
What are you writing?
I'm not writing right now, but I did do a lot of writing. I find it's really hard to do two creative things at the same time. Either, you know, you focus on one or you focus on the other. And when I started focusing full-time on art, I sort of, like, the writing just sort of went into the backseat.
What kind of writing was it?
Creative writing, flash fiction, things like that. I mean, sometimes I write articles for, like, Island Arts magazine and things like that, yeah.
And have you ever thought about incorporating some writing into the painting?
I've thought about it, but I haven't done it. I thought, well, I'll have this poem and I'll have this painting, and they're illustrating each other, but no, I haven't done that.
The idea of forest bathing is kind of poetic, so I feel like, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that show.
I guess sometimes I just think it's, the paintings speak for themselves, you know, so that's where the poetry is.
And then that's kind of a funny segue. If the paintings are speaking for themselves, they can market themselves.
Marketing is the challenge. It's the biggest stumbling block for every artist, I think. And it depends, like some artists market themselves really well, but then it turns into a product. And for me, that's hard. And I guess I don't have that mindset of marketing, you know, and I think a lot of artists have that problem. They don't have the marketing mindset, so it's really hard. Like, I had a really hard time even approaching galleries or walking into a gallery and say, would you take my work? Because I'm actually a very shy person. It was really difficult to do that the first time. And there used to be this little lovely shop gallery called South Hollow. So somebody said, well, you could take your work in there. And I was trembling going in there with a piece to ask if they would hang my work. And they're such lovely people. You know, I found out it wasn't the terrible thing that I thought it would be. You know?
Have you been to the Salish Sea Market?
Pieces. I have pieces in the Salish Sea Market, and that's also, they're the loveliest women. They're so wonderful. They're so wonderful working with their artists, but also the way they work with the customers. I was there painting in the summer one day. I went in and painted for 3 hours, and I was able just to sit there in the ambiance of the shop and see how they worked, and it was special.
Yeah. Any other challenges or anything that you?
No, those are the biggest ones I can think of, and I still I don't have the marketing one down, but.
I find that interesting because I guess if you went to a commercial program, I would have expected that.
I think we sort of always have to try to find our way, and I know that the Arts Council is doing a lot to educate people about marketing, and we have the studio tour, which is wonderful.
And is it 2 studio tours? Isn't there a spring and a summer, or is it the one?
It's just in the spring. It's just there used to be a spring and a fall one, but I think that was just too much to manage. Yeah, no, that studio tour is wonderful. You know, so many people come around, and it's not only about selling your work; it's about engaging people, letting them to know about art, having them to understand the art more, and to experience the work. Everyone can't afford to buy art. The expectation shouldn't be that you're going to sell X amount of art, like that's what it's all about, because it's not just about selling work, it's about sharing what you know about, sharing your process, and sharing your work with people. And when you sell something, it's a bonus.
Do you have any feedback or comments about, I don't think it's really true, some people can't afford art supplies, or they can't afford the ones that they want.
Yeah, I mean, I went through that for years, but I couldn't afford to buy canvases, and I couldn't afford to buy paint. And sometimes my color palette was very restricted, and it was mainly because I couldn't buy any more colors, so I just used whatever colors I had. It's really important to recognize this. Lots of times when you don't have money, you go and buy canvases from the dollar store, and it's really not a good idea because the quality is so bad. And if you make a beautiful painting on something that you could stick your finger through, it's just, not worth it.
And then that, I guess, plays into how you said you can just paint over and over
You can paint over
so if it's
things.
a good quality canvas.
Yeah, and I know there were some artists that would go out and burn their canvases or destroy them if they're paintings that they didn't like, because they didn't want to have them go to a thrift shop where someone would buy them or something like, but you just paint over them.
What about, you might get a weird texture.
It's okay when you're painting textured paintings. It wasn't so good when I was painting the thin ones.
And then, I guess the last question, just if there's anything you want the audience to know about your work in particular, or working in particular, or where can people find your work?
Where can people find my work? Well, I've got a website, so you can find my work online. I've got an Instagram where I post about my work and work in progress and stuff.
And it's your first and last name?
It's my first and last name. Also, I've got my studio at home that people can visit anytime they want. It's always open. You just have to call me and come and visit. And that information's on my website, on my business cards. Yeah.